There was a time a few years ago when I was writing business and leadership features for a fledgling magazine in the Lehigh Valley, Valley Social Magazine. It actually became the book Transforming to Grow Profiles of Change from the Lehigh Valley. And at the time, Lehigh Valley was, I believe one of the people told me, who I interviewed, told me that it was the fastest growing area outside of Poughkeepsie at the time I wrote the book, which was around 2010, 2009, around that time. And um, the subject of one of the stories was a person I knew actually through ice hockey. He was an ice hockey official. He was an older gentleman who pretty much distinguished himself on the ice with the players and in the games that he watched. He was remarkably thoughtful in how he talked to people. He was remarkably helpful in making the people understand the rules that they might have errantly uh, not observed correctly. He was um, just a joy to coach in a game. You may know that I coached a lot of ice hockey in my life. He coached for a coach in a game. He was the perfect kind of official. If he thought he might have missed something, he would ask the linesman. He was just the right kind of guy you would want. But he was also a guy who took over the Chamber of Commerce in the community. And I remember one of my assistant coaches was a pretty successful business person. I mean, we actually had a conversation at the time. I was in the marketing a private aviation company about how we could get him from place to place to place to place because of how valuable his time was becoming. But he was he came onto the ice, and my assistant coach was the one who notified me who he was. Isn't that Tony? So I had the opportunity when I was working for the magazine to interview him. And what he had done was he had been picked by some of the people in the business people in the community who knew him from his business services industry, that a business enterprise that he launched that was pretty successful. And they asked him if he would take over the Chamber of Commerce, and he did. And he did such an incredible job of taking it from nearly collapsing and making it one of name every municipal economy in America, and there's probably a chamber of commerce attached to it. Think about that in terms of how many towns there are in America. And for him to be one of 10 selected by the industrialists in Dubai to come to Dubai and counsel them, guide them in creating the kinds of successes in their cities that were created here in America, it becomes a story that's worth listening to. And when we began the interview, he said to me that I don't have a formal 4-year degree, but, and then he went on talking about his vision and the mission that he set for the organization from the day he took it over. And as he talked, he basically talked through all of the tactical engagements with each specific objective and all the clear measures that he had set for his organization to make sure that he was preventing any drift from every objective that he had set for them, and then went and followed every established best practice and strategic thinking and planning. This gentleman who walked me through, without a 4-year degree, everything that you need to do when you are trying to take an organization to be successful where the rubber hits the road. His methodology paralleled every best practice that I've studied and learned since that basically echoed what I understood from listening to Elmer Wheeler records with my dad when I was 8 years old. Now, it's remarkable uh, because after the first draft reading of the magazine article that I wrote, this person who's I wrote the story about, this guy, he called me and he said that his staff told him that he didn't want me to mention that he didn't have a 4-year degree. Now, I told him, and I have a lot of regrets about this because we became friends over the years. But when I did this, it changed our friendship a great deal. He called me, and I told everyone who did the story that I would give them a chance to read it. Oh, this is how I do an interview, by the way. I don't believe in ambush. I don't believe in catching people off guard. I believe anytime you want to ask somebody a question, you want to know what they think. You want to know what to expect. You want to know how you should hope they will perform after they've given it some thought, after they've considered their options, after they've thoroughly understood what it is you hoped to learn from them. So I regret that I didn't heed his warning. In fact, what I said to him was, the fact that you don't have a 4 degree is kind of the story. I said, the fact that it's your staff who, when you compare it to what you've accomplished, will probably never accomplish anything greater than the college degree that they have. And I have to confess that maybe I allowed my own personal history to influence my disregard for his wishes. And again, uh, I do regret it, but I also do say that is the story. Um, when I was 20, I was living with the first great love of my life, the one that I could actually imagine would have been forever and ever if a few fundamental things didn't change. Um, I'd been the leader of the auditing team. I was 20 years old, and I had been hired by a national convenience chain to be on the auditing team for the district, which basically meant you went to stores, you counted inventory, and you calculated shrink. And I did this for a couple of years, and after the first year, my boss he retired. He was promoted to supervisor, and he was replaced by somebody who was incompetent, who was replaced by somebody who was incompetent, who was replaced by somebody who was incompetent, who each had to be trained by me, and eventually I got to the point where like a buzzard. I wasn't going to kill anything, but I'm not going to train anymore. I'll let you hang yourself. And it got to the point where they had to promote me. And promoting me meant I had to hire someone. I ended up hiring somebody who was from an old money Quaker family who got caught up in the collapse of the market. He took his family's, the big chunk of his invested it in real estate, which is the soundest, safest thing you could do, and built this beautiful, beautiful home. And, this, what he's building it from would have left him plenty to live on. And this was during these Carter years. This is during these years when, you know, the market wasn't growing. It was, if you're investing in Standard and Poor's 500 in 1977, your market went backwards. You lost 7%. You know, the crisis of confidence years, as Jimmy Carter called them. And it was devastating. But he introduced me to his sister, and we fell in love and started a life together. And in some sense, she was, this was like really, really fundamentally important in shaping my worldliness and my vision for what could be. A little bit like Yale, I guess, might have been the Pygmalion experiment of our vice president. Take a guy from hillbilly elegy and turn him into the vice president as a Pygmalion experiment at Yale. I can almost envision him saying, "Here, hold my beer. Now, how can you talk like that in this sacred place, you Mr. Zelensky?" And that's what I saw in that moment. And I don't mean to be degrading to people who might live in zip codes along the Appalachians, where someone like he, our vice president, was born and initially fundamentally hardwired synaptically. And we need to talk about that a lot, because it has a lot to do with how we need to communicate with each other. And this inviting only people who can actually think to this conversation is because we do need to have understandings about all the information, as Bernard Baruch would have told us, because you can't have a good solution unless you have all the information. And if you understand Sun Tzu, you can't have all the information. And if you're thinking dynamically, you need to know you'll be planning ahead so everyone's following you instead of you trying to figure out where you're going to be next. People in this conversation know that when I talk about 5-year planning, they know I'm talking about now and 5 years. And they know that next year I'm going to be talking about then and 5 years from then as a new opportunity to plan.
On February 15th, 2024, while I was working at the small South Carolina post office, I noticed that the UPS driver delivered fewer last-mile packages than usual. When I asked him about it, he said that UPS management was genuinely concerned about the low shipping volume. They experienced the worst Valentine's Day in years. More changes were coming. He said that as a longtime employee, he had job security and a pension, but he was worried about the prospects for new hires. The impact of the plans launched by the United States Postal Service in 2021 was felt throughout the delivery industry when the calendar year 2023 closed. The United States Postal Service's plan to be saved included unmitigated job losses to the competitive package delivery market and 50,000 fewer postal jobs. During the holiday season of 2023, the federal government used its power to pull fresh revenue and unit volume in a competition for customers within the package delivery industry. The United States Postal Service claimed 3% more market than the previous year, led by the new service success of Ground Advantage. This growth in revenue and volume reversed the trend that had seen losses in market share and volume before the COVID-19 pandemic. This seemed to be all the proof needed by the postal governors to be confident that delivering for America was achieving the goals it could control. Despite more package delivery density in suburban and rural areas available for commercial package delivery competitors like UPS and FedEx to claim positive returns, the only plan imaginable to Postmaster General Louis DeJoy was to compete against the profit-motivated UPS and FedEx, claiming market share from a fertile industry. In early 2024, members of the free market Darwinian competition were captured in the United States Postal Service's investments and energy focus, delivering nearly a half-decade of the 75th Postmaster General's quixotic vision, were forced to give thousands of jobs to the public dole, while also losing billions of dollars in ways no Postmaster General before him allowed. The Postal Service's annual outcomes, posted between 2020 and 2024, are tangible consequences of following wrongly considered information that prompted tactical initiatives that could not work.
Let's understand. Thomas is not a letter carrier, but he has served them 6 days per week for a decade and has seen where the strength of America's mail delivery was before and after 2020. In neither time was the letter carrier I observed in rural America given what could make them successful.
I think about the woman who was so upset when she came to the window, and she had lost a husband earlier in the year. And she went online to file her taxes and was notified that she was dead. And she couldn't, dead people aren't allowed to file their taxes online, so she had to file by mail. And as she explained this to me, and there's no obligation to talk to people at the Postal Service, but we get to hear what's going on in people's lives all the time. As she talked, she said, I really wanted change. And I worked in a community that really hasn't changed much since 1975. And that's why people who live there. That's their seat at the table at the cafeteria. As you know, I relate everything in America, where you live and how you think, and how you have to think to live where you live, to adapt, to be successful. And we have to approach our understanding of each other with that understanding and that love and you don't ever get a chance to see it until you've actually been in Dangerous Dan of Amite, Louisiana's pickup truck at 2:00 in the morning with him ruffling through his glove box for the thing he wished he brought because he was planning to shoot you while you were out there on that road, knowing full well that he's Dangerous Dan from Amite, Louisiana, and ain't nothing going to happen about it. Just like I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody would put me in jail. Culturally, we adapt so that we can be where we need to be. And I just happened to meet the crossroads between New Orleans, Louisiana, and Jackson, Mississippi, as my two sales reps dropped me off at a bar to be exchanged, stopped at a bar to be exchanged where we ate food and drank beers until 2:00 in the morning or later. And while they all played 7.5 at the bar with Bobby Hebert on Monday Night Football. Free drinks every time Bobby got a touchdown. But the point is, the people who need to be running the Postal Service are the people who understand what the services need to be in that community. And that's why I lead with this notion that we can pay for it if we all just fight for our jobs and fight for our services that are only able to be delivered by having local post offices, by understanding what every door direct mail can do for your business or for your practice or for your community association or for your club or even for your lawn mowing service. The more information we have about what the Postal Service does for us, the more we understand that we can't allow the technocrats to take it from us. It's not replaceable.
That at this point in time has redefined our definitions with of the relationships with all of the countries in the world in a way that hasn't yet seemed to benefit us. Where the oldest president we ever had is succeeded by
the most manipulatable politician I've seen in the last decade, who would be succeeded by a person who leads our House and was elected with oligarch money of Russia. I remember in sixth grade, if you saw the series I did last year, Ignore Tom, um, the very final episode, episode 10, I did a story about Mr. Carey in sixth grade. He had a class where he talked about why we need to go to war and why we need to make sure we suppress totalitarianism and why we need to be sure that we don't have one or two or four or six voices. Instead, have 300 newspapers with 300 editorial staffs with thousands of reporters that are providing the basic research with competing news wires and three different network stations that are all competing for the stories of the day, and none of them being dominated by anything except for a challenge, a competition, and the consequences of not being sharp, truthful, and giving the news that needs to be heard in a free and democratic society by a population that is allowed to make the choice of the peers they have represent them. Now, one of the issues we have with immigration, and I have to say it parallels a little bit with the understanding of what you have when you coach a team and you have really, really talented players that never played on anything that ever won. You know, guys that are always on teams that never had a championship, but always were the best player. They create a different kind of problem for you sometimes. And we kind of have that problem in America with our leadership, where 80% of all the wealth in America has been inherited. And most of the people who are operating from a leadership position are doing it from fear. And the things that they celebrate are wealth and growth and manipulating markets. When the guy who taught me in fourth grade the benefits of capitalism for society, he and his brother started a company that just recently celebrated their 4,000th employee in the world. My first stockbroker had been a retired Marine lieutenant colonel and an Annapolis graduate with then President Jimmy Carter. In retrospect, as I think about the investment advice he gave me back then, everything he kind of said and the things that I was kind of guided to do were just basically identical to the wisdom that Warren Buffett repeats today about how you know what you should be investing in. And, you know, when he talked, he was, you know, really thorough, and he was pretty unsensational when he would talk about things. And he was very cautious, of course, because we're talking about people's finances and money. But he was, the caution was something distinctly different than being fearful. He used to have I'll never forget, we used to laugh about, he used the expression inundated. So anyway, I was in this relationship with this woman from Old Quaker Money, and she had gotten a bit of money left to her gifted to her that needed to be invested. And it was a fairly sizable amount. And of course, during 1977, around this time, if you were in the Standard & Poor's 500, you probably were losing at around 7% a year. You know, it was really those crisis of confidence years that Jimmy Carter talked about. And things got turned around. By the time Jimmy Carter was over, it was 1,000, but a lot of that might have had to do with Ronald Reagan and people believing that Reaganomics was going to make some kind of positive difference in their life. And I went to the library and I learned, best practices of people who were successful. I picked up some tools. I had this three and 10 day averaging chart that I kind of followed my investments through. But 6 months later, after I started investment, this academy, the guy from Naval Academy, educated food strategist, as we talked about, where we wanted to take our investments. He was looking at what I was doing, which was at the time, markets are going negative 7%, and I'm growing it better than 20%. And he asked me if I had any interest in joining their firm's analytics department. And I went, wow, yeah. This guy, I didn't go to college, but I'm knocking it out. I'm really working this thing and making it grow. And like I said, the stock market around the time, the low point around the time that year was like 742. And my investments again were doing over 20%, which today they wouldn't. When things were good, they wouldn't. So anyway, my broker set these things up with the two key personalities on the financial analysis side, the two decision makers, the two leaders, supervisors, I guess. And they looked down at my resume and they smirked. Now on it, it said I was governor of Boise State. It said I was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare at Boise Nation, which meant they probably never accomplished anything quite like that. And the meeting was set up by my broker, who had to have told them, look, I got this guy who's knocking it out of the park. But here's what the problem is. And it actually fits kind of the problem with communicating with people today, because a lot of the things that we have to talk to people about today actually are attached indelibly, unless they're traumatically beaten off of them somehow, to their identity. So here I am, and the guy looks down at my resume and he lifts his head and he says, no college. And before I could answer, he turned to the other guy and look, he's got a degree from Wharton, and I've got an MBA from Wharton, and I got an MBA from Harvard. What do you think you can do? And I smiled. And I got up. And I just said, thank you very much. And walked.
When decision makers are shielded by scale and abstraction, they stop hearing the alarms. Employees, customers, and communities feel the instability first. People struggle to agree not because they lack values, but because their experiences no longer line up with the words they are given to explain them. When that gap opens, people do not become stupid. They become quiet. They repeat what their side repeats. They repost without reading. They defend what once made sense, even as it stops working. Not because they are bad people, but because shock narrows attention and crowds out judgment. The collapse of shared truth in America is often described as a moral failure. Polarization, misinformation, radicalization. That diagnosis misses something essential. People are not rejecting reality. They are trying to survive the strain of living inside two stories at once. This book begins there. It asks a simple question. In plain terms, what happens when governance severs feedback from consequence? What happens when the people who design decisions no longer feel the results, and the people who feel the results are left only with narratives to hold on to? A voter's audit is not about switching sides. It is about reclaiming agency, not through anger, not through spectacle, but by learning how to tell, again, whether a system is actually working, because life confirms it, not because someone says it is.
So the starting point for all of this conversation, I suppose, we might begin where I made history in South Carolina. Um, and it's the way I did it from a strategic perspective can be replicated in all 435 districts in America. And what I did is I used the resources of the town. And in that particular town, there was a newspaper that everyone got. It was free. And it had a section where letters to the editor could be written. And responses and letters could be written anonymously, but I always put my name. And it began when the neighborhood that I moved into, the Brickyard community, if you're familiar with Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, the main road that led in through the community, it wasn't a gated community, but it had all of the characteristics of it. And you went through, and there were a couple of communities for this economic level, this economic level, this economic level. And as you went through, it came to a very end, and then all the diagrams it showed an ending and a public access intended strictly for ultimate emergencies, all grassy, old public space, green space kind of laid into the plan. And all of a sudden at the town council meeting, they're talking about cutting a hard road through it and making it a relief valve for other traffic as the town is continuing to be annexed and expand because they built a bridge that connected the peninsula of Mount Pleasant and the peninsula that would lead to Charleston, that previously you would always have to go down to the end of the peninsulas, cross the bridge, and then go south and then go back north. Now you could cross east and west at the top, in the north end of Mount Pleasant, which now is about the middle of Mount Pleasant because of the annexing that's happened since. But during all of this time, there were all these backdoor meetings, backroom meetings with developers. There were decisions made on these votes by the board. They would always go, I forget, 7-2, maybe it was 8-2. I can't remember the exact number of people on the council, but there were only two people who voted against. One was a classmate and very good friend of my son, and the other was the guy who the building that I got married in 2 years was named after. And those two gentlemen always voted in the interest of what was in the best interest of the community and all of the people, not the builders and all of the real estate development that could begin from their choices. But they were doing things like altering master plan and, for density levels, changing, they changed an historic route road that was designated as a historic route, put a circle in it, which actually works, but I mean, it's functioning better than I imagined it would. But, they were talking, well, we haven't had it. So it all started when there was a report about the town's financial situation that was published in this local paper that I read, which was subsequently framed in the mayor's explanation to us of what it said, which was framed through the tools that I've spent most of my life perfecting on how to use manipulative public relations. So I went through it with my PR authors, public relations, press release drafting uh, vocabulary, and redefined it and read it back to the community in a letter that ended with, um, it appears like it has nothing on. It's dressed up really nice, but it's got nothing on, making reference to the Gin fairy tale. And that began sort of responses from the defenders of this very popular mayor who, the last time she was elected, did so without opponent because she won by such landslides in the previous couple elections that it wasn't necessary to imagine anyone would ever be displeased by the things that she was choosing to do. But she was quoted as saying things like, she never met a bulldozer she didn't like. And if those people, in particular, to my criticism that now we're going to be opening up the road here, as I wrote in a later letter to the editor of the paper, which became a weekly letter to the editor, that people began anticipating. And that at one point, when my first wife, my former wife, was checking out at the grocery store, when the guy saw the credit card, he said, "Oh, I read your husband's column every week." Used as Ben Franklin would have expected us to share an insight, a view, an idea that's beyond the thinking that most people might be capable of from information that they may not have had access to help them understand why it is that she's saying things are good and that we don't have tax increases. But wait. What about that assessment that we pay because of the flooding that you failed to mitigate with the builder before you allowed that building project to go? And basically, those are the kinds of things that I began talking about, which ended ultimately in all four of the candidates for town council were backed by all of the deepest pockets in the town, which were, the funds were collected at an event that was not a registered PAC event, attended by all of the people who would be receiving funds, and not reported, and held on the first day, in which the reporting of it would have had to take place after the election took place, so that the names and the money and the influence couldn't have been seen until the decision of the voters was already made. And these were the kinds of things that I pointed out until the mayor actually wrote a letter to the editor explaining to the community that if I wanted to do something constructive and helpful for the community, that I should come down to her office and we could sit down and we could have some conversation, and she would give me things that would help the town, but really use that great energy I have to contribute. My son was old enough now that he's read it in the paper. And he said, "I'm going to write a letter and I'm going to. And I said, "No, son, we don't have to write any more letters anymore." And that's kind of where I see us right now in the bigger picture of American politics, in the bigger picture of our local local elections for our governors, for our mayors, for our dog catchers, for our sheriffs, and especially for our congressional representatives in all 435 districts in America. We're given 435 opportunities to send someone with unique qualities and character and capabilities and a very, very intimate understanding of what your community needs without being beholden to a party platform that allows not for compromise, but for the absolute best care your community can have, which was intended by our founders. Now, all of this, connects again to a conversation that I had in 2018 with the same president in office and people asking themselves questions about whether the things they were promised were actually happening and where does the trajectory we seem to be heading look for us as we balance our lives and where we need it to be in order to leave a better place for our children. Now, I was sitting at the Marina Restaurants bar outside. It's a beautiful little place in Bear, Delaware, where I lived on my boat for a period. And I was sitting there listening to people around the corner. I'm sitting there. There's one more seat before the end of the bar, and then it goes round, and there was two more seats, and then that flip up thing where the bartender can rush back and forth when he needs to get something new to bring back behind the bar. But anyway, and that's the service area where the wait people come and take the trays back and forth. So I'm sitting there, and there's this 3 chairs with young men in it, probably half my age, around 30 or so, and another person comes and stands, and they're having beers and cocktails, and they're drinking at happy hour, and I'm finishing up my $5 happy hour dinner and $2 beer, and they're talking about the upcoming election and wondering, who is it that we could possibly be voting for? I mean, who do these people represent, and where are we heading, and what is, just the normal stuff that literally happens every off-year election. You can count the number of off-year elections in which the president in power saw the seats in his house increase on this hand. You can count them all. It hardly ever happens. They're always, and it's not a mandate. It's, hey, it's people. Somebody's in office. He said he was going to do these things. People go home. They're not happy. So that he lied to me then, and they go back. He lied to me then. They go back. They lied to me then. They're not really thinking. They're just reacting. It is how it happens. There's this weird shit. They're listening to the news, they're being told what to do. They're listening to news, they're being told what to do. That's why, frankly, this conversation that we're having here is only being spread from people who know how to think and know how to act, know how to think, know how to plan, know how to produce, know how to monitor, know how to adapt, know how to adopt, know how to expand. That's how you take a $200 typewriter company that's been run by Americans since the first Japanese company ever came to America. For 35 years, never led anything. Until someone from the outside came, showed them a disk drive that they had used for the knitting machine area with a unique smart technology that could be used for other applications, including MIDI for the musical instrument industry, where, well, they gave me the project and we launched the best-selling product in 6 months. First ever for the company, owning any market. I planned it. Same way I planned it. It says number 1 on it, but it actually is number one of this configuration, there was an earlier model that was sent the tape fed a different direction, but ultimately, this is what we took and showed people when we were in the early stages of finding customers for the P-Touch that Brother introduced. This is the very first one. And the reason I have it is because I wrote the plan for it. These are the first P-Touch labels ever made on the device that came to market. And the prototype before this one was thrown on my desk by the soon-to-be outgoing vice president of the consumer products division at Brother International. And he drops this prototype on my desk and he says, the Jimmies just came in here and dropped this with us. They had a cassette on it that said, "Hey Jude, I need a plan for it." And they turned around and walked away. Let's process that. 1989, 1988. And one of my responsibilities when I was there was to, evaluate markets and decide kind of the direction of where we went. It isn't how I started there. I started as a sales guy, ended up working as the key accounts coordinator, ended up becoming a marketing manager, ended up becoming marketing and operations manager of a division, was about to become a director. It was going to happen in the next year, but was hired away to what appeared at the time to be a much better and more promising opportunity for my family, which was very unhappy with how Brother's American leadership was jerking us around. And we'll talk about that as well from a undercover boss kind of viewpoint. Because it's probably going to happen in your company too if you've got people with fragile egos promoted past their competence. But this was a changing, transforming culture. And the man throws the thing down on my desk telling me the Jimmies, meaning the Japanese, threw them on his desk and he needs a plan. So, just do it. I wrote the plan. By the time I was finished with it, there was a major change. That guy who threw it on my desk had been replaced. The hotshot marketing director from the first division that I joined the company with, I worked in 3 of the divisions of the company ultimately. But the first division, he became that division's VP of marketing, made me his marketing manager. But I presented the plan for this very prototype to him and got laughed out of his office. Do you know how much that'll cost?
Resolved, people should not expect those formed far from ordinary constraint to imagine ordinary need unless their duties force such imagination upon them. This is not a quarrel with wealth, nor praise of want. The prefrontal cortex, in modern language, learns planning, delay, risk, inhibition, and alternative paths. In older language, the rational part of the soul learns what it must command and what it may safely ignore. If failure is absorbed by family, capital, institution, or geography, then failure may appear as information. If failure strikes the household directly, then failure appears as loss. Both views are true within their own order. Neither is complete. This is why the high mind must not despise the practical mind. The higher mind does not ask only whether a thing can be done. It asks whether the doing of it improves the order of the whole. A figure who imagines markets, satellites, and planets shows speculative formation. This mind expands the horizon, but can lose sight of the household standing beneath it. A family line formed by sales, budgets, and local courts shows practical formation. This mind knows limits, but struggles to trust distant promises. A company that converts corporate value into employee liquidity shows another measure. Here the example is structure, not biography. It asks whether ownership can be ordered so that private success strengthens the common floor. War and deferment offer a darker measure, where one class is exposed to danger and another is protected by rule, payment, or institution. The city does not merely distribute risk unevenly, it educates souls differently. The exposed learn that abandonment is concrete. The insulated learn that danger may be negotiated. Neither lesson remains on the battlefield. It enters business, law, politics, family, and imagination.
Sometimes, the things we believe are a big part of who we are. Our beliefs can be tied to our identity. It can feel difficult or even uncomfortable to change our minds, especially when new information challenges what we have long held to be true. This is a common human experience. When a belief is connected to our sense of self, letting it go can feel like losing a piece of ourselves. But being open to new evidence is a sign of strength and a crucial part of living in a complex, ever-changing world. Public figures make claims that are later proven incorrect. Pundits make claims that are later proven incorrect. Officials make claims that are later proven incorrect. When this happens, the most responsible action is to acknowledge the error and make a correction. The political arena, especially during a presidential election, is filled with powerful statements and bold claims. Candidates want to persuade voters that their vision for the country is the best one. To do this, they use strong language and make big promises. However, not all of these claims are supported by evidence. Some are exaggerations. Some are based on incomplete information. Some have been proven false. It is important for voters to tell the difference between a solid, fact-based argument and a claim that does not hold up to scrutiny. This is the foundation of a healthy democracy.
Years ago, when I had my company Sound Brands, I attended the NAMM show, and of course, I had 3 different brands from all over the world that were coming to the trade show to sort of support the product that I sold for them here in America. For weeks and weeks and weeks, I'm looking at my 10 by 20 booth and how can I get drum kits in there? How can I get guitar amps in there? And where can I set up the pedal display for the German company that talks about their new products and gives people an opportunity to sample, see, hear, and work with a demonstrator in that part of the booth showing things how to work. Now, I worked on flow. I laid it out just like I was building a house, put everything where it needed to be, energy and hours to make sure I had the best situation for showing people how things work. In comes the president owner of the pedal company from Germany. And he opens up, he shakes my hand, steps in the booth, kind of looks at it from side to side, opens up his bag, starts moving things around in my booth. And I'm not really enthusiastic about it, to say the least. I'm like, hey, I put some work in this. This is what I was thinking. I talked them through it. I got customers. I got 3 brands, not just yours. I got customers coming in here. I got them walking through here, and I got them walking through here. And this is the flow, and this is how it works, and this is how people are going to read them, explain what goes on, and this is how. And at the end, we write orders, and it's business. As I'm telling him this, I kind of step out of the way, and he's continuing to work. He's continuing to rearrange. He's moving structures. And I'm protesting with a bit of passion now. But as time went on, I actually was seeing genius. And as time went on, I was seeing sense that he saw that I didn't. And when he was finished, I said, that actually is really great. And my German manufacturer, the owner of the company, turns to my assistant, my marketing director, and says, I always ignore Tom's first reaction to everything. So the spirit here is in a lesson from General Ulysses S. Grant, and that is to know yourself. And I picked up clues throughout my life that have let me know myself well enough to know that you probably should ignore my first reaction to everything. I want to talk about an interview I just saw with David Gallis. And David's a New York Times business writer. And he was talking about a new book that he had published that characterizes Jack Welch as the central cause for the end of capitalism in America. David Gallis said that Welch's ruthless corporate strategy popularized downsizing, popularized eliminating 10% of GE's workforce annually to boost his profits. I have a very different view of what Jack Welch's time at GE meant as its chief strategist. And from a strategist's mind, more importantly, we need to discuss how Mr. Gallis's perspective is the popular one. David Gallis said that Welch prioritized shareholder value above all else, and he's sidelined workers, he sidelined innovation, he ended long-term stability, he used mergers and acquisitions, and he brought industry consolidation, he reduced the competitive dynamism of markets, and basically what the New York Times business writer concluded in his book is that GE shifted from an industrial manufacturing company to be more about financial services and basically becoming an unregulated bank. Now, Mr. Gallis's conclusion has within it basically a misperception that I once shared about Jack Welch. Before I started studying Jack Welch and studying what he believed, what he said, and what he really did, and how it impacted the success he had. Welch's decision-making, I understood, especially as it connects to the misthinking of the popular ideas of Friedman economics, which itself is a terribly flawed theory that never worked, but still repeated, still embraced on the floors of Capitol Hill and by people who believe they know something about economics. In the 1980s, I was the marketing manager for a typewriter company that launched a machine in a category that one consumer reviewer said was the best of the three products that they tested. It concluded from about 3,000 words, which detailed differences between every feature and function, that my brand offered the best of the three. Now, here's the truth. All three products were identical, aside from cosmetic shell differences. And every single feature was identical. And the absolute mimicking of ergonomics and layout was unchanged from all of them. Now, the typewriter that finished first and the typewriter that finished second were all designed and manufactured and delivered by the company that finished third. Now, is that fake news? In 1990, I had a different product I launched, the MDI 30 and MDI 40 MIDI products from Brother. And these identical products were sent to two different magazines. And their results, their conclusions were quite opposite. But that had to do with the fact that each magazine had a different function in the marketplace and a different audience that expected different things. Now, was one telling you it's good and one telling you bad, one of them being wrong news, fake news? No.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans to use as a bluff or as a club at least to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government. I talked with an investigator for this committee who came to me with a subpoena on Sunday, November 18th. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee. My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institution. I want to retain the right to vote, the right to speak freely, and the right to write. If we maintain these basic principles, our democracy is safe. No dictatorship can exist with suffrage, freedom of speech, and press.
Hey, brother, we're boots on the ground here. We're moving on to Capitol now. I'll give you a boots on the ground update here in a few.
Multiple capital entries! Multiple capital entries! We're still taking metal, sharpened objects, missiles, to include bottles and rocks, and hand-thrown chemical-grade fireworks. This is now effectively a riot.